Hey everyone, and welcome back to Coffeesodes. You know I love a good toast topping, and that's exactly what we're diving into for this our seventh deep dive. Spreadable fats.
Ooh, yeah. Butter, margarine, all that good stuff.
I mean, who doesn't love slathering a generous amount of something creamy and delicious on a warm slice of bread?
Exactly.
But have you ever stopped to think about the science behind what makes these spreads so, well, spreadable?
I'm guessing most people haven't. It's one of those things we take for granted until that cold stick of butter just refuses to cooperate.
Yeah. Yes. Tell me about it.
Well, today we're going to change that. We're going to unpack the science of spreadability, thanks to a fascinating study that really dug deep into the world of butter and its substitutes.
Okay, so they actually measured spreadability, like scientifically.
Oh, yeah, they went all out. They used a texture analyzer to compare how different spreads perform at different temperatures.
A texture analyzer. That sounds pretty high-tech for something as simple as butter.
It might sound fancy, but it's all about understanding how these spreads behave under pressure, literally.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
They looked at how easily each spread at 4 degrees Celsius, which is basically fridge temp, then again 30 minutes after being out of the fridge, and finally at room temperature, a comfy 20 degrees.
So they covered all the bases from straight out of the fridge, cold, to perfectly spreadable room temp. What did they learn about good old-fashioned butter?
Well, one of the first things they confirmed is something we probably all knew instinctively. Spreadability plays a huge role in how much we enjoy these products.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But when it comes to butter specifically, the study found that it tends to be much harder at those colder temperatures.
Which explains why it can be such a pain to spread straight from the fridge.
Exactly, and it all comes down to its high saturated fat content.
So those saturated fats are the culprits, making it so solid and unspreadable when it's cold.
You got it. Those saturated fats really solidify when chilled.
Okay, but then how come sometimes butter seems spreadable right out of the fridge? Is it all in my head?
No, you're not imagining things. That's where things get interesting. Remember those different temperatures they tested?
Yeah.
Well, the study found that even pure butter's hardness changes dramatically after just 30 minutes of warming up.
Oh, interesting. So patience is key with butter.
Precisely. It's like a totally different spread once it has a little time to soften up.
So those saturated fats start to melt as the butter warms up,
Yep.
making it go from a solid state to a more liquid one.
Exactly. And that's why it becomes easier to spread.
Fascinating.
Okay.
Okay, so now let's talk about butter's competition. Butter substitutes.
All right, bring on the challengers.
What makes them different from butter at a molecular level?
Well, one key difference is water content. Butter substitutes, which are usually blends of butter and vegetable oils, tend to have a higher water content compared to pure butter.
Okay, interesting. But does that really impact spreadability?
It actually plays a key role. Think about it this way. Water doesn't solidify the same way as fat.
True.
So even at lower temperatures, that water in the substitute stays more fluid.
Ah, I see.
That's what helps those substitutes maintain that smooth, spreadable consistency right out of the fridge.
So they've got a head start in the spreadability game.
You could say that.
So I'm guessing they really saw a difference between butter and substitutes in their test.
Absolutely. At 4 degrees Celsius, most of the pure butter samples were significantly less spreadable than the substitutes.
Okay, makes sense.
But here's the catch. As the temperature increased, the butter's spreadability improved drastically, especially after that 30-minute mark.
So given enough time, butter can catch up in the spreadability race.
Exactly. But here's another twist. The study actually identified 2 specific butter samples. They were labeled MEH and PRME. And these were more spreadable than their butter counterparts, even when cold.
Hold on, rogue butters? That spreads smoothly straight from the fridge.
That's right. They were the outliers, showing spreadability values closer to the substitutes, even at that chilly 4 degrees.
Wow. Okay, so if it's not just about saturated fat, what other factors could be making these butters so spreadable?
That is the million-dollar question. And it seems like this study really tried to get to the bottom of it. They didn't just look at basic spreadability.
What else did they analyze?
Well, for one, they looked at water distribution,
Okay.
because it turns out that impacts not only texture, but also how well the spread inhibits bacterial growth.
Huh. Interesting.
Apparently, a well-distributed water phase is key for keeping things safe and tasty.
Wow, I never thought about that.
They also delved into something called plasma pH, which basically means how acidic the water phase is.
Okay.
And they found differences between butter and substitutes in this regard.
I guess that makes sense since they're produced in different ways.
Exactly. Butter gets its acidity from fermentation, while substitutes often use added acidity regulators.
So even though they achieve similar results, they get there via different paths.
Exactly.
Wow, it's amazing how much science goes into these everyday products.
It really is. And you know what else they found?
What's that?
They actually busted a myth about color.
Okay, spill the tea.
They found that butter and substitutes scored very similarly in color analysis.
Wait, so the assumption that all butter substitutes are paler than butter is just wrong.
It seems so. Turns out you can't always judge a spread by its shade.
You know, I'm learning so much today, but I think we need to take a little breather. We'll be right back to unpack the implications of these findings and maybe even bust a few more myths along the way. Okay, we're back. And my head is spinning with all this butter knowledge. But I'm still wondering, what does it all mean for the average person who just wants to enjoy a nice spread on their toast?
Yeah, that's the key question, isn't it?
Like, should we all be ditching butter for substitutes? Or is there a clear winner here?
Well, it's not really about crowning a champion. It's more about understanding that butter and substitutes each have their own unique strengths.
So it's more like choosing the right tool for the job.
Exactly.
Like if I need something that's going to spread easily straight from the fridge, a butter substitute might be the way to go.
Precisely. That higher water content we talked about really gives them an edge in the spreadability department at colder temperatures.
But if I'm willing to wait a bit for my butter to soften up, or if I'm using it in a recipe where it'll be melted anyway, then maybe butter's richer flavor makes more sense.
Right. It really comes down to personal preference and how you plan to use it.
But speaking of those rebel butter samples, MEH and PRME, the ones that spread smoothly, even when cold.
Ah, yes, the outliers.
Does that mean we could someday have the best of both worlds? Pure butter that spreads easily without sacrificing flavor?
It's definitely possible. I mean, their existence suggests that it might be possible to create pure butters that are naturally more spreadable, even at fridge temperature.
So maybe someday we won't have to choose between convenience and flavor. Do these findings have any implications for the food industry as a whole?
Oh, absolutely. This type of research can help food manufacturers understand what consumers want and need, and then they can use that knowledge to improve their products.
Imagine a world with butter engineered for perfect spreadability at any temperature.
Right.
That would be incredible. But here's where my mind starts to go a bit haywire. If it's not just about saturated fat, what other factors could be at play? Is it just a mystery we'll never solve?
Well, it's definitely a complex issue, but researchers are exploring different possibilities.
Like what?
For example, could it be the production methods themselves?
Okay, interesting.
Maybe the way the butter is churned or tempered could influence the final texture.
So it's not just what's in the butter, but how it's made that matters.
Exactly. There are a lot of variables to consider.
Like butter's this whole secret world we're only just beginning to understand.
You could say that.
Okay, so this study also looked at the fatty acid profiles of different butters. Can you remind us what fatty acids are and why they're important?
Sure. Fatty acids are basically the building blocks of fats,
Okay.
and they come in different forms: saturated, monounsaturated, and polyunsaturated.
And each type affects our health differently.
Right, so saturated fats are typically solid at room temperature.
Like the ones that make butter firm when it's cold.
Exactly. And they're found mostly in animal products like butter and meat.
Okay, and then there are monounsaturated fats. They're liquid at room temperature, but solidify when chilled, right?
Yep. Think of olive oil.
Which turns cloudy in the fridge.
Right. Monounsaturated fats are generally considered heart healthy. They're found in things like avocados, nuts, and olive oil.
And then we have the polyunsaturated fats, always liquid.
That's right, like the omega-3 fatty acids we hear so much about.
Okay, so this study analyzed all these different fatty acids in butter. Did they find a connection between certain fatty acids and spreadability?
Well, that's the surprising part. They didn't. The study found no direct link between the fatty acid makeup of a butter and how easily it spread.
Wow, so the type of fat doesn't determine how spreadable it is.
It seems that way. Spreadability really is a multifaceted issue.
So there's still a lot more to learn.
Absolutely. The quest for perfect spreadability continues.
Well, this has been fascinating, but I think it's time to wrap things up and leave our listeners with some food for thought. All right, we're back for the final spread. I have to say, I am stuffed with butter knowledge.
It's amazing how much there is to know about something we use every day.
Seriously. But before we wrap things up, I think it's time to leave our listeners with a little something to chew on.
I like it.
A final thought to spark their curiosity.
Okay, let's see. Remember those outlier butter samples we talked about? MEH and PRME?
Oh yeah, the ones that defied all our expectations about cold butter.
Right. Their existence really begs the question, could the secret to smoother butter lie not just in the ingredients, but also in how it's made?
That's interesting. So you're saying that the way butter is churned or tempered could have a big impact on the final texture.
Exactly. We often focus so much on what goes into a product, but what if the process itself is just as important?
That makes me think of how different brewing methods can make such a difference in coffee, even if you use the same beans.
Perfect analogy.
So could there be a whole world of undiscovered butter-making techniques out there, just waiting to be explored?
It's definitely possible.
Imagine artisanal butter makers experimenting with different churning speeds, temperatures, cooling methods.
All in pursuit of the perfect spread.
It would be like the craft beer movement, but for butter.
Exactly.
We could have butters with unique textures and flavor profiles.
All thanks to the artistry of the maker.
Maybe someday we'll be choosing our butter based on how it was churned rather than just whether it's salted or unsalted.
I love that idea.
And maybe, just maybe, this exploration could lead to that holy grail of spreads.
Pure, delicious butter that spreads perfectly straight from the fridge.
Without any compromises.
Now that's a future I can get behind.
So listeners, as you reach for your next spread, whether it's butter, a substitute, or maybe even some artisanal creation we haven't even dreamed of yet, remember that there's a world of science and history behind that simple act.
There's always more to discover.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us on this buttery adventure.
Thanks, everyone.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive on Coffeesodes.